everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Chats with Nilu, brought to you by Shanti Margam. My name is Niluka Gunawardena. I will be your host for today. The organization that's bringing this episode to you, Shanti Margam, works at providing safe spaces for children and youth in our country in order to promote their emotional well-being, social capacity, and with the vision of creating a peaceful society marked by love and coexistence. We are very lucky today to have an excellent guest speaker. Before I get to the guest speaker, I would also like to remind everyone that we have the episode in Sinhala and Tamil as well today. For the first time, we're going to have chats with Kiru. And the guest for that is also the guest we have today for the English episode, Thiviya Kandiah. Thiviya, thank you so much for joining us. Last month, we looked at the issue of teen dating violence. This month, we will be diving into the topic of racism and discrimination. And when we talk about racism, we're going to look at it in the widest terms, in terms of discrimination based on ethnicity, skin color, and other identifiers. Racism and discrimination is a very wide topic, but it is marked by certain characteristics. Often when it comes to defining who the other is, when it comes to defining who we are not, we tend to use stereotypes, we tend to use generalizations, and make assumptions about who the other is. And this othering is specifically felt by marginalized persons, including persons of racial or ethnic minority groups, persons with disabilities, LGBTIQ people who are subject to these narratives of marginalization. Also, discrimination is a complex experience where we have multiple identities, and based on those identities, we can experience both privilege and disadvantage. So keeping it in mind that racism and discrimination is something complex and that our experience of it is also complex and intersectional, I would like to bring in Thiviya to kind of really dive into this topic and certain elements of it. Thiviya, for those of you who do not know her, is a clinical and health psychologist. She also has a vast amount of experience in international cooperation and humanitarian aid. Thiviya has been working as a practicing psychologist for over 5 years and is working in the areas of community-based psychosocial support. She has spent a significant amount of time in providing humanitarian support to the war-affected population of Sri Lanka, especially in the north and east. And she's also an avid yoga practitioner, an artist, a painter, and really loves engaging in cross-cultural feminism and enjoying the beauty of nature. So a very diverse person, a very colorful person. Thiviya, thank you for being here with us today. So to start off with, like I mentioned, you know, in your opinion, when we say racism, discrimination, what does that mean to you?
Thank you so much, Nilu. First of all, I'd really like to thank Shanti Margam and the team for having me to speak today about this very timely and important topics that we are going to discuss. And such a wonderful introduction to the topic and um, about myself. Thank you, Nilu. Such a pleasure. Now, yeah, when it comes to racism and discrimination, before diving into racism, I'd like to reverse the order and we'll look at discrimination first, and then we'll go into racism. Because discrimination is generally the action or behavior which is negative towards a particular group or a particular identity of an individual based on age, race, religion, ethnicity, sex, etc., etc. So when we say discrimination, it's basically this active putting someone down because they're different than us. So that's where the whole spectrum, it's a spectrum where we can put all the kinds of segregations that we have in our society, from disabilities to sexual identity. And something that we also kind of overlook is that age discrimination. So it's a complex phenomenon. Yeah. Now, when we come to racism, it's a little different. It's a result of discrimination, but racism is also this ideology. It's more of a presumption, this perception that we have that we are superior because of our biological or cultural identity to a particular group or multiple groups. Now, we can still be, we can still have our racial ideologies and be non-discriminatory, because discrimination is the action. Another overarching thing of racism is that the term racism is kind of widely used. It goes hand in hand with treating a separate group, a minority group. But if we actually deconstruct this term, race is mostly the biological or physiological attributes of a person or a group. Whereas if we take our personal experience and come to Sri Lanka, what we've been experiencing is ethnic discrimination. It's the cultural identity that we have found to be superior to these other groups who are presumed to be a minority or inferior. So that's something that we've been dealing with. And when we take the two terms, it's also a social construct. It's not something that we can take and untangle and be done with. It's something that's been engraved in us, and it's so beautifully transferred to us through generations and generations because of the diversity, the factors that it brings in. It has given us identity because we have identified ourselves through these descriptions and definitions. Yeah, so that's something that I wanted to bring about when we were talking about the two terms today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Divya. I think, sorry, Thiviya. um,
It's
I
okay.
All right. One thing I think that really stuck with me is the idea that racism and discrimination, especially, is the act of separation, of treating persons differently because of their perceived difference of identity or appearance, right? And I really valued the fact that you touched upon intergenerational transmission of racism or ethnicity-based discrimination. I mean, when we look at especially children and young adults, right, adolescents, they often mimic the behavior and the speech of the adults in their environment. So looking at that strand of intergenerational transmission, can you please tell us a bit more about how adult behavior patterns impact children within the larger discourse of like racism and discrimination?
Yeah. So this is quite generic, but I'll speak about the generic behavior pattern, and then we'll come into racism and discrimination. So we as humans, we are social animals. We need others to learn about threat and safety. So we seek out, especially when during the developmental stage, we seek out to our adults how they act, how they react to a certain situation, to a certain conversation, to a certain idea, and we learn. Now, that is where we all our social constructs get engraved in. With time, this changes because we start questioning whether this is right. Do I feel right about it? Do I not feel right about it? Is the society accepting of my behavior? If it's not, then do I change it, or do I go engage with a group that accepts me more? So when it comes to especially parent-child learning behavior, Our brains are quite a fascinating part of the body. What happens from the infancy to like the childhood is that we crave for categorization. We want elephant to be a mammal. We want peacock to be a bird. We want girl to wear girl clothes. We want boys to wear boy clothes, because it's too much to learn. It's like, okay, I'll put you in boxes first, and then I'll learn, okay, so you're a girl, but you can still wear pants. And you're a boy, but you can still like things like what I was taught shouldn't be liked by a boy. Like, for example, to like pink or to like flowers. So the merging of social understandings and identity happens later towards our development. Whereas when we grow up, our brains crave for categories. And that's how the whole social construct started, because it's easier to group. It's easier to know an apple is edible and a stone is not. Bad example, but that is something that we grow up with. So we can't totally say that discrimination is something that's non-human, because it's a natural trait of us to put things into category. Now, when we as adults or parents enact a certain behavior, speech, actions, that is what the child learns. He or she mimics the behavior, mimics the reaction, mimics responses. Sometimes it's so unconscious. We think, oh, I actually didn't think that I would say that, but it's something that we've seen our parents or our elders say or react to, and then we catch ourselves saying, yeah, it's against what I practice, but it became so natural. And that the natural reaction is what I'm trying to refer as this transgenerational behavior and reaction, which we kind of learn as children to our young adulthood.
Yeah, thank you really for explaining all that in such a clear way. The ways, and also the fact that, this categorization, discrimination between objects and persons is something that comes naturally to us in terms of the way we learn, and that in terms of the way we process our complex lived environment. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. If we are programmed to categorize, knowing that, in a sense, I guess, how do we navigate difference, right? So that difference could be based on ethnicity or race or ability or sexuality, and specifically looking at LGBTIQ populations. How do we recognize the fact that, yes, we have a discriminating brain, but how do we still navigate in a loving and compassionate way, in a way that respects diversity, despite having that inclination, to discriminate?
Yeah, now that's something that that's a learning behavior. So we have behavior that we watch and mimic, and there's which is also learned behavior. So we as humans have the tendency to constantly learn, and with discrimination, what to be more inclusive is where we become this person or individual who can unlearn our biases, become more aware of our biases, and learn more inclusive attitudes and behavior. And also to be, like you rightfully said, to be more empathetic and compassionate towards another individual, especially when we take the LGBTIQ community, because it's one thing to be identified as a minority because of your cultural identity. It's an additional layer that they have to deal with because of the sexual orientation or the sexual identity. And that is something so sensitive, especially in the current trend, because we see so much of hatred just openly shared. Um, but I think we're also in this phase where we are asking questions, where we are trying to step up and be more inclusive, and we are trying to unlearn our behavior patterns and say, hey, making a joke is not funny. It can offend people. So let's be mindful. I think that's where this whole practicing acts and attitudes which are more mindful, especially as a parent, because um, that I mean, we as children learned certain attitudes and behavior from our parents, and we kind of detached ourselves from these discriminatory acts or attitudes because we learned that it's offensive, that it is affecting a particular group of community. So as adults, I think we hold responsibility in being more mindful in our actions and our responses when we speak about a particular minority. When we identify a group, instead of calling them minority or identifying them as this individual or a group which is deprived, we need to identify them with the strength and the diversity that they bring into the community, because that becomes a more positive reinforcement where the child doesn't have to question what is wrong with them, why are they treated differently, so that I need to be compassionate. Rather, the child learns, oh, they're different, and beautifully so, and let's be friends. So there is no need of that negative attitude or this questioning and need to correct, and the guilt that we carry within. Because obviously, even me, even though I try to be as inclusive as I could be, and I'm trying to bring more awareness. I know as a child, there's been so many instances where I have felt and I have done behaved a certain way where I've just mimicked my adults, which has certainly affected a particular individual or a particular group. Even now, I catch myself saying a natural response, saying, "Oh, oh, don't like." Don't be a girl, even though I'm an outright feminist. I catch myself saying that because it's engraved in us so deeply, which is why, and then that follows with the guilt. Now imagine this happening to a child who is only learning to be a part of the community, and when they come into terms with understanding different groups, especially LGBTIQ, because we're talking about them in this question, for them to respond in a more natural way and to realize, oh no, I offended my friend or I said something so wrong, that comes with this negative feeling and emotion, which is guilt and feeling bad. Whereas if we change that narrative and we look at the diversity, I think that doesn't require that guilt. So the positive outlook becomes more natural.
Thank you so much, Thiviya. Actually, I mean, it gives us a lot of power and agency in that sense when we realize that we are responsible for our own biases and our preconceptions, and that we can unlearn them, that we are not just, passive vessels of influence in a sense, right? And even as parents, to take responsibility for our own behavior in given the ways in which that is mirrored by our children, and then duplicated and replicated. And I think, like you said, and this is where organizations like Shanti Margam become very important, is to introduce that respect for diversity, that empathy and compassion to children from a very young age, the ability to understand different perspectives. And I loved how you said, it's the beauty of who we are, right? Like, that's this diversity. It's like, a flower garden full of all kinds of like flowers and plants, and just to instill those values in children through our behavior as adults, and also through exposure from a very young age, would make a big difference, I think, in the way that children then go on to approach diversity in countries like ours, which have struggled to celebrate the beauty of that. So that said, thank you, Thiviya, so very much for engaging with us today as our guest speaker. Any final thoughts, any passing thoughts, any message to our viewers on, overcoming these biases of discrimination and racism and moving forward as a country?
Thank you, Nilu. I mean, I think we are at a stage where we're more aware. We're becoming more aware, and we're holding ourselves responsible as adults. So we can certainly create a more conducive world for our children and even for ourselves by instilling this habit of being compassionate just towards each other, just without any labels. There's this beautiful board in Shanti Margam which says labels are only for jars and not for humans. So let's remove all these labels and treat each other just as a human being who'd want to be treated equally and rightfully so.
Yeah, thank you so much for that powerful message. Thank you so much to the Shanti Margam team, Amara, Adley, Nathan, Kamani, who have made this program possible today. And thank you so very, very much, Thiviya, for sharing your beautiful ideas and insights with us today on Chats with Nilu. Those of you who would like to can join us in the Sinhala and the Tamil sessions that will be happening later today. Thank you very much, and we hope to see all of you next month in our next episode of Chats with Nilu.